Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this Bristol Life Business Surgery with Stripe OLT. I hope this finds you well in these continuingly weird times, where today's heresies are often tomorrow's orthodoxies. My name is Greg Ingham, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this Bristol Life Business Surgery. We aim to give guidance on key sectors by leading experts in their field. Today, Stripe OLT on data and cyber security. We'll be talking shortly with Tom Robbins and Ryan Pullen from Stripe. I'll be interviewing both on your behalf, and please do ask questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. You can be anonymous or as named as suits. Today's event is being recorded and will shortly be on YouTube. And we've got a great number of attendees today, really interesting range of attendees through from SMEs to tech companies, to the University of Bristol, through to Deloitte and many others. So we're hoping it'll be a really good and stimulating session for us all, because we can all do with help figuring out our response to running companies in these times, when many of our core assumptions about business have been stress tested like never before. Some certainties, or two certainties perhaps. Inertia is just not an option, and hope is not a strategy. If we merely all hunker down and cloak ourselves in limiting caution, then we will prolong our recovery, or worse, reduce the chances of better trading. Instead, we've just all got to push on in our various ways to rebuild our pipelines and get fully active. Before we get going this morning, some updates for you. First, on our next Bristol Life Business Surgery, which will be on Tuesday, 8th of December with Triangle Networks. The following week, we'll be running our last Bristol Life Business Club of the year on December 16th, which is a charities and Christmas special. Of all the sectors hit, you just imagine how tough it has been for our charities. They haven't been able to have retail in the same way, they haven't been able to have the fundraising events in the same way, and yet the need for charities has never ever been greater. So we want to foreground some of the brilliant charities of Bristol on that date, Wednesday the 16th of December. We also have some awards updates. We have transformed our Bristol Property Awards into the Bristol Property Symposium, which will now be running, including the awards, on February the 12th. This symposium works in 3 stages. It's a sort of property conference: thought leadership, a plenary session with keynotes with national level insights on resi and commercial property, networking, unique sponsor hosted hubs with structured and randomized networking. And then, yes, excellence, celebrating the brilliance of so many Bristol-based property businesses, live presented awards, recorded sponsor films, and various live reveals. Following this week's government's announcement that gatherings of 4,000 or even perhaps 2,000 fans will be allowed for sports events, or 1,000 for business events, we have been asked about the prospects of running those awards in the Bristol Property Symposium in real life. We take a cautious view on this. It is pretty unlikely that we will be able to do that, even whether or not the query, if Bristol will be in tier 1, 2 or 3, somewhere between 2 and 3, and we'll discover that tomorrow, I believe. Which would of course preclude, if it's 3, would preclude the real life events. We will update when we know, with the greatest clarity that we can muster, given the situation just keeps changing all the time. But our supposition is we'll run that as a virtual event on February the 12th. One way or another, it'll be a unique gathering of hundreds of property professionals from everywhere in the value chain in property, led very much by our headline sponsor, Smith & Williamson. Our second major awards next year, we are fully intending to run in real life, which will be on April 22nd, which is the Bristol Life Awards. It will be the biggest gathering in Bristol that there has been of all different types of businesses, from the coolest of the indies to the largest of the corporates, coming together to celebrate the unique dynamic excellence of Bristol. Last time, I think we had 662 in our large marquee on Harbourside, and we had over 100 on the waiting list, which we'd closed some weeks beforehand. The demand was strong last time. We think it'll be significantly more so this time round, because frankly, being able to get together again in real life will be just such a unique and we hope wonderful experience. All the signs are that demand has been pent up for in real life events. So please do talk to us about how you can be involved in whichever way. Right, to business this morning, let's talk about data and cyber security. Let's welcome our two speakers from Stripe OLT. Stripe is a Microsoft Gold partner and cloud and cybersecurity specialist, and also proud Bristol business. Here's Tom Robbins and Ryan Pullin, and as they're pressing the buttons to come on screen, I will give you a little bio of each of them. So Tom has had over 15 years in information technology. Morning, Ryan. Hello. And is an expert in Microsoft Cloud solutions, particular focus in Microsoft security. He's the most recent director on the leadership team, mainly working on the client services division, and he now leads Stripe OLT's BizDev team. Ryan has previously worked in a FTSE 100 environments, extensive experience in designing, developing, and delivering scalable cybersecurity solutions in a wide range of industries and sectors. And you gather from that, so we've got a sort of a more business focus and a more technology focus between the two of them. So let's welcome you both. I hope you're in good fettle, good spirits.
Hello there.
Good. Let's talk about Stripe as a business and how this year has been for you so far. Talk us about your narrative as a company.
So yeah, it's certainly been a challenging year. I'm not sure how many times I've heard the word challenging over the last 6 months, but yeah, it was very interesting. Sort of back in March, understanding we went from normality to a full remote workforce, which is just not how we're used to operating. It's like a team function. It's we're very big on culture here, so having to shift from we're all in the same place and it's fun to work together in the sort of coffee machine conversations to right, everyone works from their sometimes bedrooms to living rooms and stuff like that. It's been really difficult to manage.
But it must have been perhaps more easy for you, given the nature of your business, than for other companies. You have systems and infrastructure and technology.
Yeah, it was a lot easier for us because we were in a position to pretty much pack up on the end of one day and then start the next day remote. So we didn't have to actually make any changes to our infrastructure. So we were fortunate then, and it was just dealing with the client requirements. We weren't sort of warmed up to this. It was right, this is happening and we need to cope with it now.
Yeah, we're sort of jump cut into new realities on a regular basis. Like, now what do we do? And everyone has felt that, give or take. It's been a sort of staccato year of major change. We'll come on to clients and obviously to the service offering shortly. I want to pick up one element that perhaps rather boldly, you as a business have undergone a rebrand during this time. You talk us through the rationale for that and what the intended benefits are of that rebrand.
So yes, it's been exciting. Over the last sort of 2 weeks, it's really launched and become live, and we've had to sort of adopt it and spread it throughout the company and clients. As a management team, we kind of made a decision at the start of lockdown, right? Do we conserve? Do we hold back and sort of decide what's going on, or do we just push forward? And we had lots of big plans around growth and a rebrand, of course, and websites and new teams. But we decided, let's push on. We still got these plans. We want to make them happen. So we pushed forward with it, and the rebrand's gone live. We've grown as a company. I think we've taken on around 10 people through lockdown, and the marketing team have done a great job launching a brand. And yeah, now we're here.
Right. Tell us about that. That's every business which has taken on new people, either as a replacement or part of growth, has had, of course, the issue of onboarding people remotely. But that to one side, I'd like to understand more about your recruitment process. I think you've got a particular focus on tech vets. If you'd like to explain what that is, I think that's your internal shorthand.
Yeah, this is totally Ryan's bag. So Ryan, over to you.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a community called Tech Vets, which are veterans that are either going through resettlement or have left the military and are focusing on a technology career path, basically. And lots of those individuals are moving towards a cybersecurity focused career path. And lots of my friends and ex-colleagues and previous working relationships have come from military channels. Like most of my friendship group are ex-military of some extent. So I have very good sort of communications within the Tech Vets community, and we started recruiting down that path. So because of the people I'd worked with in the past, they recommended certain personnel, and we started with that. And what it brings into my team, especially within sort of cybersecurity operations, incident response, dealing with ever-changing circumstances, we hire people that have been in certain situations which present difficult situations on a regular basis, and being able to sort of understand that and navigate those situations. So we saw a sort of a great uptake in transitioning those skill sets from life experience to technical sort of controls and measures. And so we've exclusively been hiring from the technical community, tech vets community, for sort of the past 3 or 4 months, especially within my team. My entire team's built out of ex-military personnel at the moment.
And without wishing to oversimplify or play to cliches, presumably they bring with them a structure and a disciplined way of working that perhaps other areas may not.
Correct, absolutely. And that's something that within my team I really appreciate and don't take for granted. When things are happening at, we run a 24/7 operation. So getting a call on a Saturday evening at 3 a.m. is never comfortable. But for these guys, a lot of them have lived that for a long time. And the appreciation from us is there, and the support networks and structure and all of those different elements to build that into a really focused deliverable is imperative to us.
And also what helps with your recruitment and your growth is Bristol, of course, being a major tech hub. It's a brilliant, perfect example in many ways of cluster theory. And how material do you think has Bristol been in your growth as a business for either of you?
So from my perspective, which is more sort of personnel driven, we've got the Cheltenham M5 corridor basically, and there's a lot of investment going into sort of the Golden Valley and cyber hub with places like Hub 8 coming up and running, which is sort of flexible working offices for cybersecurity related businesses in Cheltenham. And so I've always worked from Bristol, but between Bristol, London and Cheltenham, there's some very, very core sort of cybersecurity businesses and operations. So for us, being a part of that has been very, very impactful.
And to a greater or lesser extent, I think any Bristol tech business gets that halo effect of Bristol being recognised as such an exemplar of technological development, which is great. Let's come on to the client mix. Perhaps more initially for you, Tom. How has your client mix changed in this year? Clearly, you'll have had some tough for some sectors, but perhaps presumably not for tech. Where have you had growth in this year, and where have you had step backs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So being mainly cyber focused, we specialize in legal, finance and fintech. So that's we've got some really strong partnerships in those areas, and because we can align our services in terms of making technology secure, we find that when we create partnerships they're really valuable and last a very long time. We were doing lots of work in aviation. There was a huge set of projects that we were working on with those guys in some different airport landscapes, and of course aviation didn't go so well earlier this year, and it was for
obvious reasons. Yeah,
a big problem there. So all of those projects went on hold, and obviously we're going to be there when it recovers, and it will. But yeah, that stuff took a real big hit.
Yeah, I mean, you've been long-term proud partners with Bristol Airport, and as you say, that business, we all know why, but we also know with great confidence that business will come roaring back when it can in the spring and onwards next year. So you'll be there alongside, I'm sure.
Completely.
Tell us how you approach Stripe as a business. Is it essentially more of a portfolio business that you're looking for the size and scale of businesses, or is it more vertical in terms of sector specialisms? You mentioned legal and fintech. Yeah,
it's definitely more vertical because of the way that we structure our business and what we really go deep on in terms of secure cloud technology. That really enables us to offer value in those particular sectors. Legal, fintech, compliance, data security, that is totally our bag. That's where we shine. We don't pretend to be anything else. And therefore it just creates really strong partnerships, and we can really add a lot of value there.
Yeah. So talk us through the typical client process, as far as any client is typical, and these times are typical, which they're obviously not. But what would be your approach? How does it work? Is it sort of exploration, diagnostic? What would it be like if we were to beat a path to your door?
So generally, what we're finding now is that we've got new engagements. The issue will generally start in some sort of compliance assessment. So we've just migrated to the cloud as an example, and we understand that there are risks there and things that need to be taken care of. So generally it'll be what we call a gap analysis, where we take a snapshot of your current security posture and understand what it looks like now. We benchmark it against government best practice and NCSC, and we create a strategic roadmap to get you from where you are now to that gold standard.
And what is the trigger for companies? How do they know that they've got a problem? Is it a review of business, it's sensible practice, perhaps as companies build scale or diversify or whatever, that they should review all of their policies? Or is it more of a trigger event? There's some breach of security which prompts them to approach you?
Unfortunately, it's the latter generally. It's often too late, and we've had data stolen, or we've seen some suspicious activity, some suspicious emails have been sent out from one of our users, or ransomware, generally it's too late. So we do get some other sort of instances where people need to align with a certain certification like Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, and they'll come to us for that help to get them there. But on the most part, it's when it's too late and they need us to sort of clean up and make sure it's secure going forward.
Yeah, is it? I mean, you probably won't like the direct comparison, but is it a bit like a company that has a break-in puts in better physical security? Is it broadly that sort of psychology?
Yeah, completely. The door was open, and now we've closed the door, and it's got a much better lock on it, effectively.
And presumably some of the companies, in terms of scale, if they are, I don't know, publicly listed or whatever, there may be certain sort of performance accreditation needs that they have that you would be brought in to support. Is that part of the work as well?
Yeah, 100%. And all of our frameworks align with the customer requirements. So it might be ISO 27001 or Cyber Essentials Plus, something like that. They come to us with that requirement. We need to get here. And we're familiar because we work with those as well. And we'll create that, right, this is where you are now in terms of your posture. This is the work to get you there, and then we can go for that tick in the box.
Yeah, and presumably some sectors, particularly the public sector, that need for compliance, that proof of accreditation is, it's a sine qua non. You can't operate without it, presumably.
Completely, yeah, definitely when it comes to PCI compliance. So companies that are taking card payments, if you don't have compliance, your bank will fine you on a monthly basis. So it's really important you've got it and you're using the right controls.
And whilst you have those verticals as you've talked about, I mean, I'm thinking of some of the companies watching this today, are there certain sectors that you simply would not would not wish to get into, or are you provided it's of a scale, you'd be able to diagnose solutions for almost any type of sector? Yeah,
I mean, of course, as the Stripe journey has gone on, we've got clients from all over sectors, including sort of zoos and stuff like that. So some really big clients with some really exciting meetings when you're on site. It's quite different when you're seeing tigers when you're going for your first strategic meeting and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, realistically, if a client needs help securing their Microsoft environment, we can help them.
Yeah, I mean, just I don't want to be frivolous, but for zoos, presumably it's visitor data. Is that the sort of the data that you're particularly focused on?
Yeah, so with a zoo, obviously you've got visitor data, so it's public information, but you've also got all the card payments. So you want to make sure that they're PCI compliant and that data is secure and separate.
And Ryan, from your point of view, given the array of companies and different mindsets, skill sets, and so on, how do you approach it when you've got people who are fundamentally, very tech proficient and understand the constructs that you're talking about, all the way through to those who just simply don't have much of a clue but are reliant on you. How do you approach that sort of almost managerially with clients?
You treat everybody the same out of the door. To be honest, you don't go in with any sort of expectations or previous understanding, and then you work back from there, because what you don't want to do is waste time on anything that's already resolved or done proficiently. But like you said, in the fintech space, we deal with lots of developers, lots of cutting edge sort of data analytics and things like that. And we stay with our specialisms, and we provide our recommendations based on sort of our experience and knowledge. So from a management perspective, it doesn't really differ massively unless because we, in our reporting and the way we take through engagements, everything is done in person, basically. So we never send a report without the opportunity for you to ask questions. So if this person was of a non-technical background for whatever reason, and they were leading this operation from a managerial perspective, we would take them through all of the individualistic elements so they understand them, so they can take it away with the context delivered to their business. So it's all intelligence-driven results, basically. Whether it's instant response, a phishing campaign, or a larger piece of a mail migration or something like that, we would take them through right the way through the business element. So whether that's me, Tom, one of the other key stakeholders, one of the engineers, they would take them through those steps to make sure they understand. Because at the end of the day, we could be charging them for something and they might not understand it, and then that's not a good situation to be in. So we make sure that there's the opportunity for those questions to be asked.
And just on that charging point, this may seem a little bit transactional to you, but as a sort of threshold point, is there a sort of a de minimis or a sort of typical size where, to be honest, it may not be worth companies coming to you because you're operating at a sort of mid to upper level, or will you take business almost at whichever level?
Yeah, we generally probably the average sort of client that we work with in terms of the amount of staff they have, usually around 50 people. When the scale starts to come down and you're sort of around 10 and slightly lower, what we find is those people haven't quite established a cybersecurity budget or a full IT budget there. So generally they get to a scale where, especially in fintechs, and we've got quite a few fintechs that we partner with, the fintech will have a guy that's either the CEO that's done the technology for them, and they've got to about sort of 20 seats naturally, and he's managed to deal with it. And then he's like, right, I need to actually do some work on the business here. And then he comes to us for that outsourced help.
Right. So you, like like all professional services, rely ultimately on trust. There is a belief system which says that a company is willing to entrust its cyber destiny up to a point to you, as well as obviously being a proud Microsoft Gold, the accreditation you have there, and clearly your track record and case history and so on. How do you seek to inculcate trust with clients, new clients?
Yeah, that's a real tough one, because like you said, we're taking on a lot of responsibility, and effectively they're handing us the keys to the kingdom in terms of locking it down and securing it. So really it comes down to track record. We've got some strong partnerships that we'll be able to provide case studies on and sort of talk about work, and even provide sort of client reference calls, just to cement that relationship that we've done this in your space before. Here are several case studies. Here are the contacts here if we want to set up calls to just provide that level of trust and that label. And
another thing to mention as well, our engineers hold sufficient certifications in the areas of the business that they are operating in. So, for example, Azure security, the engineers working in that space for the clients will hold the appropriate certifications like AZ500, MS500, all of these sorts of things, which are all, acronyms for this, that, and the other, but they're specialisms within their sort of expert remits. And so with me, it might be penetration testing or instant response, and that goes right the way throughout the business to really back up sort of the evidence of our experience and expertise.
Yeah,
I noticed that in your bio about penetration testing. For lay people such as me, could you just briefly explain what that is, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So a penetration test is an offensive security assessment, which in layman's terms is how vulnerable are you to a drive-by attack or some sophisticated actor to try and gain unauthorized access to your business, whether that be through a misconfiguration, a technical spear phishing campaign, which is a targeted email to you pretending to be someone else, or something that will make you more susceptible and vulnerable to compromise. It could be something as far as social engineering. And we look at all of those different elements depending on what sector you're in. So if we were to launch a phishing campaign as a part of a penetration test to gain our initial foothold in a business, to then understand where we can go from there, and can we get access to the finance data? Can we get access to the HR records and things like that? For example, if you have a recruitment department, lots of recruitment team members are opening Word documents and PDFs with CVs and profiles. So those people at times can be more vulnerable to opening pro-enabled documents if you haven't got the right security configurations. So a penetration test can take all sorts of different shapes and sizes, whether it's your website, whether it's your laptop. For example, you want to know if it's safe if someone left it on the train. It's quite deep in that sort of aspect, but it's testing what vulnerabilities you pose as a business and how you could be targeted.
This may be a bit filmic or even trite, but are there ever occasions where you're sitting with a client and say, hang on a second, let me just show you how easy it is to break through your firewall or whatever, and you show it live? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you talk through an example of that?
So yeah, absolutely. So I use this as a more of a demonstration for an educational exercise. So I deliver training courses to chief execs and other sort of C-suite level executives around cyber awareness and what the impact is for them, and really try and contextualize it to that they are at risk regardless of who you are, and it's how you manage that. So everybody out there, if you're a chief exec of a company that's doing good, you're going to get interest from other parties and other competitors. So what I do is a very, very simplistic Wi-Fi sort of example, where I, with something like this, which is a Wi-Fi pineapple, that was just there, by the way, that wasn't.
Sorry, a Wi-Fi pineapple?
Yeah, so it's a piece of equipment which allows you to mimic another hotspot, or build basically a rogue hotspot, which you can pretend to be Starbucks or something like that, a trusted entity, so BT or Fawn or something along them lines. And if you connect your phone to it, what we can do is you can intercept all of their traffic and see what they're doing, and leverage information from there, basically. And we do this just to show the capability. That's battery powered. You can hide that in a backpack very easily. These sorts of attacks do happen. It's not like quite sort of news driven in the sense that every Starbucks Wi-Fi is vulnerable, but this is where the use of VPNs and things like that have come into use. So with my demonstrations, what I do, I have two mobile phones, and one's sort of the attacker and one's sort of the victim, and we go through and we can run sort of a password crack against the device, and we can run a password crack against the Wi-Fi hotspot and things like that, showing people how vulnerable they are. So on some international engagements where security has not been a priority, particularly, we've been able to show and demonstrate the fact that if someone was able to get within range, and you can buy antennas where you can do this at 500 meters and things like that, if someone was able to get in range, you would be at risk because of X, Y, and Z.
And then what has been the chief exec or whoever the senior person is, what has been their reaction when they realise just how vulnerable they are right now?
So these things you can learn on YouTube, and we're very, very basic sort of level attacks. You can learn the technology and methodology on YouTube, because there's a lot of software out there that can do it. The penetration tests we provide are more methodology driven and things like that. But so executives do react in a way that it's sort of alien to them that these things are possible, and that you know, this could happen to them in theory, because they know that they've been at a business meeting and joined this, or and we try and work back from there around countermeasures and recommendations to provide sort of secure access, and especially in the high net worth space and you know, business management leaders.
So anyone watching this, obviously primarily from a company point of view, but from an individual point of view, would you advise never to join a public Wi-Fi service for the reasons of vulnerability, or is that too paranoid?
If you have 4 or 5G sort of communications on your mobile, I would personally recommend that against using public-driven Wi-Fi hotspots, because first and foremost, you most likely have to sign up with some sort of information where you don't know what third parties it's going to. You don't know who else is active on that network or sort of their infrastructure. Most people don't consider these things, and that's understandable. You know, day-to-day life, you're probably not going to, and that's fine. But security often isn't their most paramount concern. It's more accessibility and availability, right? So if you can, if you have no option other than that to join that, use a VPN, which is a virtual private network, which sort of contains your information separately. So if you've got sort of a Euro tunnel, you're a much smaller tunnel within that, where your information isn't able to be shared around as easily.
But the point about VPNs comes back to remote working, not perhaps from Stripe's point of view, but from clients' point of view. You know, our own business, everyone is having to work remotely. First reaction is, how the hell do we do it? Second is, then what is the most optimal way to do it? The third is, what is the most cyber secure way? I mean, presumably VPNs can be broken into, and they have a degree of vulnerability that any system has.
Yeah. However, it's leagues ahead of just connecting to a sort of an airport lounge Wi-Fi or something like that without it. But you're absolutely right. There is vulnerabilities with VPNs, and you know, very, very typical sort of skill sets are able to leverage them. But that's realistic. You know, you're getting into the upper tier of threat space there. That's not your average, or you know, even your medium enterprise sort of level of sophistication where they're going to put that level of effort into.
Well, I wonder if sort of one level below that, there's an expression that this time of the great pause has also been the great accelerator, and that it's brought forward issues which have been inherent. So, for example, working from home or remote working in whichever way, distributed access to private data has highlighted inherent flaws in how companies work their data. Have you had clients coming to you on that basis, that suddenly they're realizing how data is distributed and it needs to be more structured?
Absolutely, yes. And
can you talk through an example, perhaps obviously not naming the company, but the type?
Yeah, no problem. I give an example of something that was sort of, you know, that sort of immediate uptick in necessity, and Tom can sort of talk about around what we do with SharePoint and how we sort of integrate those technologies. But with regards to my team, we identified sort of certain remote access controls and how they were being used to enable users to remotely work. And those methods being used at the time were not secure. It was publicly open and available for people to be able to try and log in, basically. And with the right sophistication and technology, you can try an awful lot of passwords and combinations in a small time frame, basically, which is called a brute force attack. Those things can be utilized to a negative extent, and so very, very quickly, sort of emergency cab and change approval, we began implementing a VPN access solution for them, collectively from multiple departments at Stripe, sort of driven forwards by the security concern, and you know, we were able to do that proactively, and that was great. I've responded to incidents in the past throughout the years where they haven't been proactive, and those things have tripped them up. But with regards to sort of data access and privilege, we utilize SharePoint ourselves at Stripe, and we utilize it very, very heavily, and that's sort of driven by sort of Tom's background and expertise.
Yeah. Okay, we've had, by the way, people, anyone watching this, please do use the Q&A to pop questions through. We can take them anonymously. We've had one from Joel Clark. Joel, I'm sorry, I'm not sure which business you're from, but Joel asks, what would you say is the biggest factor when trying to alleviate risk from cyber attacks?
So I'll give my
Great
opinion
question.
on, yeah, it is a good one. I mean, the absolute number one consideration, and it's like, for whoever's watching today, if there's absolutely one takeaway that I'd love to sort of enforce, it's turn on MFA or 2FA. So multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. And this isn't just business, you know, this is your Hotmail accounts or your MSN accounts. You need a way of protecting those email accounts and those identities. So the biggest factor for me, which is often overlooked and I think it reduces cyber risk and sort of the risk of being hacked by over 95%, is just by turning MFA or 2FA on. So just make sure those are on all your accounts.
Could you, again, for the lay people, as it were, on this call, just talk through that multi-factor authentication, how that works?
Cool. So multi-factor is there are just several ways or a multiple way of logging into a machine and confirm the identity is yours. So if we look at the way Office 365 does it in the Microsoft world, you've got your laptop, you type in your password, and then it will send you a text message, and it's a multi-factor. You can get different apps that ping up and confirm your identity. The one that Microsoft uses is called Authenticator. But there's new technology now, like on your iPhone, where you've obviously got your PIN, or you've got the Face ID. So it's just a factor that it can recognize that's not just a 6-digit code, for instance. So you've got one form, and then you've got a second form.
Yeah, it's a 2-layer or more protection, and presumably on more complex data requirements, it's many levels. It's not just two. Maybe Ryan, perhaps in military-related areas, perhaps there's the authentications. One would imagine are pretty profound.
I think it changes quite a lot, yes. But to give some context to sort of the reason Tom's saying this is because a lot of compromises that we see and that are brought to us and sort of my team is because breach credentials and assets have a tangible value and they can be sold. So for example, you know, data being sold is the more costly than oil and all of those sorts of analogies and things like that people are saying at the moment. So if TalkTalk got breached back in, I think it was 2015, 2014, those details were up for sale. And those details being active, if you signed in with your business email address and account, people are creatures of habit. Password reuse is a real thing. If you use the same password for your TalkTalk account as you do for your corporate email address, I'm going to go and try that email address and that password in Office 365. I now have access to your email account, and what you can do from there could be pre-positioning, could be financial sort of fraud. So you could be changing bank account details on payroll and things like that. So from there, those sort of levels of sophistication can change. And so a part of Stripe OLT's function is threat intelligence, and we look to see if we can identify your company's information with your approval. So we need written consent beforehand, and then what we can do is we can go away and try and identify how many details, if any, have been identified with regards to sort of your specific domain, and then we can proactively make sure those details are changed and make sure that they are compliant to your standards and things like that. Because if, for example, if you have an employee who doesn't have a personal email address from a few years ago, and they've always just used that because they run a business and their business account is their personal account as well, kind of thing. If they use that account on their bank account or their Sky or sort of MyFitnessPal, MyFitnessPal was a very, an application that got breached. And all of those details were up for sale. You can buy 10,000 of these accounts for around $4, just to put it in context. So what you don't want to be is the low-hanging fruit. And if you've got multi-factor authentication, the chances are someone's going to move on and they're not going to target you. Sophistication and targeted attacks are sort of a different remit, but just to provide a little bit of context without sort of talking for too long around the importance of those, you don't want to be the sort of weakest link in the chain and then be that person to fall up, basically. And that's
because the weakest link will eventually be breached by someone at some stage.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think it's as a sort of stand-back point related to this, do you think it's fair to say that companies, arguably individuals as well, simply don't take cybersecurity sufficiently seriously? That's perhaps only when there's the data breach or an external focus that the issue actually comes front of mind.
That's a challenging question to answer because every business is individualistic and has their own priorities. So it could be intellectual property for a very small 3-man company that provides specialist equipment to a defense contractor.
Yeah.
Their requirement will be very, very different to a 500-seat charity, for example. Charities will want availability and consistency in that, not necessarily the confidentiality for sort of internal networks. So you've got two massive, completely different examples there. However, cybersecurity sort of applies to them both very heavily, but in different ways, I guess. So I think the uptake during 2020 and people being away from offices and sort of in a bit more isolation where things are easier to sweep under the rug and stay away from sort of difficult conversations, it's become imperative. We've seen it. Stripe have seen this impact and increase in sort of necessity, with security being more streamlined and sort of business centric. So yeah, we've definitely seen an uptake in that, and I think businesses are taking it more seriously, and there are budget driven assets. So like Tom was saying, compliance, that's a huge thing for you to be able to operate in certain sectors now. And you wear that badge, and if you haven't got that badge, then you're losing out on business. So it becomes sort of that imperative.
It's like your point earlier that the legal sector is a really important part for you. Many legal companies wouldn't accept digital signatures on documents, but they've had to. That great pause becoming the great accelerator. You see it in the legal sector particularly. But talking related to legal, I wondered if something such as GDPR in whenever it was May 18 was actually useful for business for you, that it brought into focus. We were prompted to think more carefully about our data and our business. So it's an ill wind, tough things externally help your business.
Definitely, yeah. GDPR was a huge one for us. And understanding what types of data you've got and then making sure that they stay secure and safe was, yeah, we were quite busy that year. Let's just say that.
So you wouldn't wish it at all, but if there were to be some massive data breach, that washes down to all sorts of businesses, and we all have to be very careful. There's a question from our good old buddy anonymous attendee who nearly always turns up for these webinars. In a world, sounds like one of those voiceovers for a film, in a world where remote working and hot desking may be the norm for companies in the future, which it probably will be, how can I ensure my staff are being cyber secure in their home/hot desk environment?
That's another huge conversation point that I'm talking probably daily with businesses on sort of our quarterly strategic engagements to make sure that there is that understanding, because it's very easy to hide away and become a number if necessary, for some. So what we do to try and counteract that, and we've seen a large uptake this year especially, is strategic phishing campaigns. So we run a phishing campaign without the malicious payload, but we can understand who may be susceptible, who may be vulnerable. And there's a common misconception that you're trying to sort of catch your employees out, and that's not necessarily the case, because what you can do and what we do is we take actual examples that have been sent to employees in the past, and then we distribute that around the entire organization to see who else may have been susceptible, and then we provide targeted training and awareness on those topics, and that would be from someone like myself, where we can really dissect an email individually and try and provide sort of key indicative sort of actions. So for example, generalistic address field, spoofed email domain. So it might be a whole jumble of random characters, or susan.boyles@hotmail.com, and they're sending you an email with a signature from BT. So all of those sorts of indicative things when, if you're a very busy individual and you've got 250 emails a day or whatever, those things, you can skip your mind. And it's about sort of engaging actual targeted training instead of just sending them e-learning videos and everyone just sort of like, yeah, press play and we'll move along. They work in some situations, and as long as the content is applicable. But so what we are doing is trying to educate personnel around the impact that they can have, because genuinely, all it takes is for one user in some circumstances to affect the entire organization's operability.
Yeah, it's a big education exercise looking at the heart of your business offering. Is that indicative education that makes people think, hang on a second. Can I come to a different end of the scale for businesses? And I'll give these simply for illustrative purposes rather than any sort of context. Should companies reliant on such as, I don't know, PayPal, Shopify, Eventbrite, Dropbox, whatever the iteration is, be especially concerned about data management, or should they take comfort in the much larger businesses being that much more regulated, more thoughtful about their own data protection and so on? Is that naive to say that, or should they be more vigilant? How should they approach it?
Definitely vigilant. What you'll find with these bigger platforms is the reason they're so popular is because they're easy to use. So really what that means is, and it's the same with Microsoft, when you buy it, it comes open, everything's really collaborative and it's easy to log in and use. It's your responsibility to make sure the password's set at a right complexity, and you've got MFA and 2FA enabled, like I said. So even when it comes to PayPal, that stuff doesn't prompt you to enable 2FA, but in the background, you've got your credit card details in there, So I've certainly got 2 credit cards and my bank cards in PayPal. If someone gained access to that, they could book a nice holiday and away they go. So all of those services like PayPal and Shopify, you should make sure that you log in, you change your password to a secure one that's not being repeated. Use a password manager. That's often overlooked. People are writing passwords down on notepads and even sometimes on their screens. Use a password manager. They're so easy to use. They're free for personal use mostly. They'll generate passwords for you and they'll store it all nicely so you can log in automatically. So yeah, it's a good question. Definitely with those bigger platforms, check that you've got those controls in place. You've got a good password and you've got 2FA and MFA enabled.
And anywhere, whether it's professional or personal, so I don't know, personal might be an Amazon account with your credit card details, etc. Anywhere where you are transacting personally, be that much more vigilant, and as well as using a password manager, presumably also change your passwords very regularly.
Wow, the advice has changed on the latter there, around changing your password. What Microsoft did studies along with the NCSC, and what they found was that people would pick like Thomas Robbins 1, and then, oh great, 30 days later, I've got to change my password again, I got to remember another one, I'll just use Thomas Robbins 2. And for the bad actors, that's quite easy to sort of guess and put in a password generator. So the guidance has changed. It's complex password and a long password may be changed annually.
So the reason for that is it's very easy to meet complexity requirements with November 2020 exclamation mark. You're hitting the capitalization, you're hitting the number, you're hitting the special character, and you're hitting the length of password as well, right? However, what's going to happen in December? What's going to happen in January? And then with the right technical tools, you can generate over 400,000 passwords in about 6 seconds. With the right levels of input. So you could say, right, four character number after sort of these keywords generated in different formations with different special characters involved, and replace O's with zeros and ones with L's and L's with ones and all of this sort of stuff. And you can automate that. It's not like someone's going to create that list manually. Computers can be used for those things to do it much quicker than we can.
Two questions on the same area. One from Jamie Butt at Triangle. By the way, Triangle Networks, we're doing another Bristol Life Business Surgery with very shortly. Jamie asked the same question, much the same one that anonymous attendee, maybe the same one, asks. What password softwares would you recommend businesses to use to keep their details and logins safe? And the anonymous person said, can you recommend a password manager? It sounds dangerous to entrust one entity with all your passwords, which strikes me as a fair point. How do you respond to those two?
Absolutely is a fair point. There's certain levels of encryption, certain budgets that these companies entrust themselves with. So, lots of Silicon Valley based password management organizations are putting hundreds of millions into security related infrastructure. And I had the same skepticisms. But we recommend, it depends on sort of the product usage, but there's things like LastPass. That's probably one of the more famous ones. There's things like Key Vault. There's lots of different connectivity related requirements. So if you use ServiceNow, you can, which is a sort of a software-based ticketing platform for IT management. If you use that, you can choose a software package that may integrate with that best. So there's lots of different manufacturers. I personally use LastPass, as do a lot of our customers, but also a lot of standard home users as well. And that's because what you can do is you can generate sort of a 32-bit character, and then what you need is to make sure that your master password and your multi-factor authentication is enabled. So it's mainly around the configuration. If you have the same password for your Facebook account as you do as your LastPass manager, then
that's crazy.
That's not you're not going to be leveraging the capability to its maximum extent, and you're going to put at risk. So, sorry.
I was going to ask you, out of interest, how do you then approach it as a business? Does everyone in the Stripe team have the same sort of password generator process, or do you leave it to them to decide? Either professional presumably you do centralize. What about personally, your personal accounts?
So professionally, to one side, we operate that in a very specific way for sort of data segregation and sort of need to know basis. So access of least privilege, basically. But from a personal side, every password's different. I don't even know them most of the time because they're so sort of crazy, long, ridiculous. Even if someone asked me what it was, I wouldn't be able to tell them. And I use multi-factor authentication codes for every service that has it enabled. And if it doesn't have it enabled, I select wisely what information you sort of use with it. That's me personally. Everyone's different. People want an easy life sometimes, so they use the same password for everything. It's very typical when your sort of family member asks for those sorts of questions.
Your Netflix account or whatever it might be, or
exactly.
We won't delve into people's domestic lives, but I suspect others may also be guilty of that. I want to come to one question about quality of data and access. We've talked briefly about such as PayPal and so on. What about the sort of tier below, well, some tiers several below, such as website template companies? Clearly, there are all different sizes of companies there. Should there be an inherent concern over backdoor access to sites created using those templates, or is that just cyber paranoia?
There is significant vulnerabilities with some WordPress templates out there. And so with WordPress in particular, and this isn't to just be on WordPress, but I've responded to multiple website defacings, taking off lines, all of those sorts of things in the past. WordPress admin interface isn't particularly secure, or in the past it hasn't been. Admittedly, I've not touched it for a long time, but in the past it hasn't been. And things like admin login pages being publicly facing, so instead of sort of IP restricted or specific user access without multi-factor authentication. So there is vulnerabilities there with regards to some of those smaller sort of independent business style.
Sorry, Ryan, if I may interrupt, I think just for the purposes of clarification, we should say that the big caveat about your comments on WordPress is that probably is an historic position.
Yeah.
And you're not commenting on its position currently.
Correct.
You're neutral on that. But separate to individual companies, there'll be other template designers, builders that you would say, how would a small company who thinks, gosh, that's a really easy way to build a website because I can just take this stuff. How should they approach this in terms of vulnerability?
You need to do your own sort of auditing, realistically. And we see that a lot, and that's a service that that we provide, and we try to provide that context and intelligence for the client to be able to make their own decisions around their vulnerability and sort of risk profile and threat surface. Because as I was saying about WordPress, that is a legacy thing. However, there are legacy templates still around, like lots of things. People are habit, creatures of habit, and if it's broke, if it's working, don't fix it, kind of thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that whole sort of saying, and some templates, basically out-of-date software on the back end can cause a lots of severe issues with interoperability and sort of software upkeep, basically. So you need to audit your own infrastructure and applications.
You mentioned about Stripe itself moving to a cloud solution. I think that's one of the points earlier. How should we as business owners feel about cloud storage? Nothing is too big to fail, right? So what extra sort of backup precautions should we each consider, as well as a single cloud provider?
Good question. So there's one big misconception around sort of when you move to the cloud, which is a great point to highlight, that when you've got your server in the office and you decide to move all the data to Microsoft or Amazon or one of those platforms like Google, what you're gaining as an advantage is resilience. You've got the cloud, you've got the Microsoft servers and the Amazon ones that are vast data centers all over Europe and throughout the world, that your data is replicated, So if, for instance, a UK data center goes down, your access switches from UK to somewhere in Germany, and you don't really see any difference. They repair UK and it switches back over. So that's resilience. But what those platforms aren't automatically doing for you is backing that data up. That's your responsibility. So what we found on a few occasions, that everyone's sort of shifted terabytes of data to SharePoint. They've got all their email in Microsoft land. Effectively, if you delete a terabyte of data in SharePoint, it'll go into a recycle bin, and in 30 days, it'll be deleted. So it's removed forever, and that data's gone. Microsoft won't get it back for you. So if you're heavily reliant on one of those cloud platforms as a place to store your data, you need to make sure that it's backed up, because with the cloud comes resilience, but they're not going to back up your data for you automatically.
And to that point about automatically, in other words, it's incumbent, of course, on the company to have, if not sort of multi-factor authentication, it's going to need a two-stage at least backup solution, that the cloud isn't the end point. There has to be a prior step as well. Is that the advice? Always have two? Yeah.
So of course, definitely, if you're migrating to the cloud, you've just moved your sort of like target focus area to your little office IP in Bristol, and then you're moving it to a public cloud. You're much more sort of open to threats. So move there, effectively secure it before you move your data there. You want to do that. You want to make sure that the windows are shut and the doors are locked. Move your data there. It's nice and secure, and then make sure you've got a backup of it, because if you've got an insider threat that deletes a lot of data, or you delete documents by accident and they're gone, and then after 30 days, all of a sudden you realize, oh no, I needed that customer data, it's gone, and and Microsoft support aren't going to get it back for you.
Yeah, well, it's sort of bad enough that the data might be housed on some server farm in the Nevada desert, but at least it's there. But you're very much making it clear people, companies particularly, need two solutions. I'm going to end on a personal question to you each, if I may. When it comes, you've talked, of course, about the risks and the need to change thinking and the protection and the vulnerabilities and so on. I just wondered how you are in your personal lives, in your friendship groups, your families and so on. Are you sort of a bit like the plumber with the leaky tap at home, who sort of diagnoses but doesn't do? Or are you the most sort of assiduous of your group in terms of personal cybersecurity, cloud data information shared and stored and so on? Tell me about it.
I'll go first, because mine's going to be quite quick. Generally, when I finished, the last thing I want to do is help one of my cousins set up their laptop. So I try and steer clear from it. I've had enough when it comes to the end of the day. But again, if I'm around them, I'll always try and enforce, look, guys, what's your password? If you've got the same password for 5 accounts, come on, and I can show them examples of where that's really bitten someone. So yeah, that's my take on it.
How about you, Ryan?
To be honest, a lot of mine's quite similar, with the family IT support go-to person kind of thing. I'm not a fan of that life, but it's one of them necessary evils, I guess. And you know, it is imperative to point people in the right direction and not just draw a blind eye. And especially with friends, you know, you can play the odd joke here and there, but at the end of it, you're delivering a message to try and increase security to at least some extent.
We've had a late twist in the plot. Just as I was about to finish, we've had good old Anonymous has popped up with the insider threat point. Are they the main cause of cyber attacks? Perhaps a disaffected former employee. Is that a narrative that you see?
It's definitely one that we see. I wouldn't personally say it's the main cause. It is arguably one of the most impactful because it's very, very difficult to identify standard user behavior against suspicious behavior, and there's awful lots of verification and investigation that goes into that to understand sort of cause, methodology, why, you know, all of those sorts of questions and actions. And that's why at Stripe OLT we operate least privilege, because it protects the user and the organization itself. You can't access data that you don't need access to, kind of thing. So, for example, me in my role, I can't access anything sort of related to financials that are outside of my department, because I don't need that, and that sort of protects me to somewhat extent, and protects the business as well. I'm sure Tom has a view on this as well.
Yeah, we partnered with a few recruitment companies to help them sort of secure and in particular secure against that inside risk that they have. They've got a lot of valuable data, and what we found was the customer challenge that data, if taken and copied onto a USB stick or emailed out, can be used for a commercial advantage in the next role by an employee, something like that. So yeah, we've really helped customers understand where your data is and how we can stop that being taken and copied onto devices and used elsewhere. So that's another form of it.
Well, really good. We are going to have to call a halt. We're through our hour. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I thought that was really great. Our thanks today to Tom and to Ryan of Stripe OLT. Thank you to all of you for your time as well. I hope you found it useful and perhaps a prompt to action. We've had a few good cattle prods to action from our duo today. We all need to think more carefully with greater assiduity about our data, and of course to imagine what would happen were there significant data breaches, how that would affect businesses, and thereby what steps should we be taking now, including, of course, potentially at least beating a path to Stripe OLT's door. More generally, we can all do with help in these times. So if you have a professional service which will help others, and of course which you're seeking to grow business from in 2021, please talk to us about a Bristol Life Business Surgery. Look out for the next Bristol Life Business Surgery, as mentioned, with Triangle Networks, which is 8th of December at 11 AM. Also our charity special for the Bristol Life Business Club on the 16th of December. Thank you to everyone for your support for Bristol Life continuingly, but particularly in this year and in these times. And best wishes to you all, both individually and professionally, to all here. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the Bristol Life Business Surgery. Thank you. Bristol together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Cheers, Greg.
Very good.